Hello, I'm Jim Demmer with Clark County Close-Up. Thank you both for meeting with us.
Welcome.
Thank you for having us here.
Sure. So, why has opioids become such a problem in Clark County?
Well, opioids have become a problem throughout the United States and throughout the state of Washington. Opioids are now responsible for more deaths in Clark County in the state of Washington than traffic accidents. So, for example, in 2016, there were 20 traffic fatalities in Clark County, and there were 34 deaths from opioids in 2016. In Washington, I'm looking at the numbers here, in 2016, there were 537 traffic fatalities in the state, but 643 deaths from opioids, unintentional deaths from opioids or people overdose. So it's become a huge problem. And we can talk about the reasons for that. There are a number of reasons for that. One is, over the past 20 years or so, the amount of opioids prescribed increased, and for various reasons, but we saw more prescriptions for opioids. And then we also saw heroin becoming quite inexpensive. We also have some synthetic opioids like fentanyl, which are pretty cheap to get. People, even when their prescription ends, heroin and fentanyl are alternatives. They're opioids, and they're very powerful alternatives to prescription medications. But I also want to mention some other things. It's not just the opioids, the supply of opioids are out there, but there's other causes and root causes for substance use disorder, including things like lack of housing, adverse childhood experiences, early childhood trauma, a lot of these things put people at risk for substance use disorder like opioid use disorder, and then you add the prescriptions in, and it becomes a bigger problem. So for a variety of reasons, opioids have become much more of a problem both in Clark County, Washington State, as well as in the country as a whole.
And it's been hitting the news. The one thing, there's the stereotype of addicts buying drugs off the streets, but actually some of this can happen when you go visit a doctor for something. Could you explain what's going on?
Well, I mean, that was what I was saying earlier, that the amount of prescriptions beginning, I think, the 1980s, 1990s, and early 2000, physicians were actually encouraged to provide more opioids, more pain relief. We were making pain as a vital sign, back 20 years ago, and there was a move to get to provide more prescriptions for opioids. That's actually begun to taper off. That's actually decreased in the last couple of years, but we created there was a large amount of supply. We had a number of folks who became dependent on opioids, and we can talk about what dependence is. So, and then when the prescriptions dried up, heroin and fentanyl are alternatives to that as well.
So there was I've heard it talk, there was like a pain treatment center that closed down.
Actually, that actually was pointed out by Under Sheriff Cook when he testified before the county council back on February 20th, and that led to the vote that the county took to enter into litigation against some pharmaceutical companies, and pointing out that the pain clinic closed down. And we instantly saw a rise in robberies of pharmacies, and then false reports in pedestrian traffic accidents, all in an attempt to obtain painkillers of a type. And for that reason, the county entered into litigation back on. You can get the full interview on CBTV on February 20th.
And along with that, I mean, a lot of these medications were marketed, or some of these medications were marketed to physicians as being safe and non-addictive when they actually were. So for a number of factors, but then you also factor in homelessness, poverty, all these other root causes, and it all adds up to the problem we're facing today.
2 weeks ago, Time magazine dedicated a special pictorial edition of Time on the opioid epidemic, and it really did outline everyday people, middle class, students, family members. One of the stories was a captain of a police department's adult child, who became dependent and finally passed away. as a result. So you're right, it's not stereotypical. You're not thinking of the people under the bridge or in the shadows. This is out in our community today.
Mm-hmm. And once they become dependent, and I was also in that work session hearing how that the price of drugs was going up higher and heroin was a cheaper alternative, and then they were switching to that out of.
Right, and then when then you turn to some type of when you run out of money, then you turn to some other types of activities to obtain your money that aren't always legal, and that's where it comes in, where the sheriff's office comes in.
And Alan, maybe you could talk just a little bit about dependency. Why is it so physically dependency and it affects people?
So there is a
greatly?
difference between dependency and addiction.
Okay.
So dependency, drugs like opioids cause dependency, and there's a couple of features about dependency. One is tolerance. So if you're taking opioids for chronic pain, which is why it's not a good choice for chronic pain, the drug has less and less of an effect over time, and you have to keep on taking more and more of it. That's tolerance. And then the other piece about dependency is withdrawal. If you stop taking the medications, you get sick and you get a withdrawal symptom from being off the medications. So that's dependency. And a lot of people who are taking opioids for chronic pain, they're not really what we would call addicts. They become tolerant and they require this pain medication over a long period of time. Addiction is when your behaviors change and you end up with compulsive use despite the negative consequences. So, for example, you're looking for your next hit of medication, and you don't have money, you might rob a bank or something like that. That's compulsive use, and that's a feature of addiction. But not all opioid users are addicted. Most of them are probably just develop dependence on the drug and can't really live very well without it. Both groups are at risk for opioid overdose. So all folks who are dependent as well as folks who are, we'd call addicted, are at risk for opioid overdose.
Okay. So, and we talked about the county council took the action to retain a law firm to go after pharmaceutical companies to try to get some of the costs back. So let's talk about the impacts opioids and heroin's having on the criminal justice system.
Sure. So in the last 3 years, the sheriff's office has made 234 arrests for heroin use. But that's just the sheriff's office. When you start looking at the entire county, I look to the jail, where all agencies who make arrests bring people in. The Bureau of Justice Statistics looked at jail populations nationally and found that 19% of a jail population, regardless of what they're arrested for, have self-report an opioid or a heroin use. That means 14,000 people come through my doors a year. That 2,600 of those people may not be arrested for heroin use, but may be arrested for burglary, robbery, another crime where they're getting money so that they can support that habit. Further, Clark County started a drug court. In 2009, they handled 18 cases. In 2017, 88. Now it's gone up and down, but they're on 88, and this year they've already got numbers going up. I don't know where it's going to end up. So overall, you've got a real impact on the criminal justice system. And then Alan mentioned a few moments ago about the early childhood issues. We can help people because we keep drugs out of the jail. So we help them come off their addiction, whether it's alcohol or medications. But the problem is that that's just taking them off of the medication. That's why we have the reentry program. That's why we have mental health counselors to help deal with those underlying issues that are taking these folks to these extreme measures.
And these become intergenerational issues. So I mentioned that if you have early childhood trauma, you're more likely, you're at risk for substance use disorder. You're at risk for a variety of chronic diseases. And we will talk about this as opiate use disorder is a chronic disease, just like diabetes is a chronic disease. But if you have early childhood trauma, you're at risk for this. Well, some of the measures of early childhood trauma are having parents who have a substance use disorder, having a parent who's incarcerated. That's a traumatic event for a child. So the more we put people in jail, if they're parents, that's trauma for their kids, and the more likely for those children to develop a substance use disorder later in life. So it's kind of an intergenerational thing, and we really need to get a handle on that.
Yeah, so we've talked about how it impacts law and justice. How about community health? You kind of talked about that. How is the opioid crisis impacting community health?
Well, it's devastating for communities. So, number one is you have, opioid overdose now is one of the major causes of death in Clark County and in the state, and more so than car wrecks. But it also devastates families, because if you've got parents who are either in jail or substance use disorder, that has a traumatic effect on their kids as well. Mm-hmm. So, people with substance use disorder are obviously going to live a lot less long than people without that, including opioid use disorder. So,
now public health is recommending naloxone for heroin users and those who they are in close contact to be available in case of overdoses. Can you describe how this drug works and how public health distributes naloxone?
Right, and we're recommending it for anybody who's an opioid user. So naloxone, the name brand for it is called Narcan. I like to use the generic name for it. So it's naloxone. It's an opioid antagonist, and what I mean by opioid antagonist is it actually blocks the opioid receptors in the brain. One of the things that the opioids do, if you take too much of them, is they slow down breathing, and actually you can stop breathing. Naloxone actually reverses that. So if you encounter somebody who's got an opioid overdose and they're not breathing, you can actually administer naloxone. There's an injectable form as well as a nasal form, and you can basically save, it's life-saving. So we're distributing naloxone to people who use the syringe exchange, the harm reduction center, the needle exchange center, and I believe the sheriff's office has been some of their officers. I think you've had.
We have them in our patrol cars. We have them in the jail, and last year we had 2 deployments of Narcan.
Yeah, it's okay.
Yeah,
it's
Narcan.
Right. It's easier to say than
it is
naloxone.
easier to say. Yeah, it is. So we've had 2 deployments last year in our patrol division.
And we've had hundreds of, so we give the naloxone kits to clients at the harm reduction center, and they actually use them, and they report whether they've used naloxone. We've had hundreds of reported reversals through the naloxone distribution program. We've been doing that since 2014, so we've got 4 years of experience doing that, and it is life-saving.
Okay. Now, there's another thing that I heard about, that Clark County Jail has been providing inmates who were in treatment program that came in with under a treatment program that you are now providing medically assisted treatment. Can you explain this treatment and what it's about?
Sure. So medically assisted treatment, MAT. So what we've done is we've been approached by public health and the ME's office, because when someone comes into jail and they stay for a while,
ME's medical examiner's
I apologize,
office.
medical examiner's office. They come in and they stop their treatment. Mm-hmm. And after release, they go back out and they start right up at the level that they were using at, which can lead to overdose and death. So we were approached by both public health and the ME's office. Can you change your policies on this? It's not just Clark County. This is a statewide, national move. If someone comes to jail, our doctor now has gone through the Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, training, along with our nurses. And if a person comes in who is following their doctor's treatment, mm-hmm. and are up to speed and constant, and they bring and we can actually get the medication too, we will continue that medication, that medically aided treatment in the jail, so they're less likely to go out and overdose upon release.
Yeah, the data, there's a number of studies that show one of the highest risk groups for opioid overdose and death is people who've been 2 weeks after release from jail. Mm-hmm. So people come in on, so medication-assisted treatment is the use of medication in conjunction with counseling and other forms of therapy for people with opioid use disorder. And there's a couple of drugs that are used. Methadone has historically been one. Another one is called buprenorphine. It's a component of something called Suboxone. And that in conjunction with other forms of treatment is very effective. So in the past, people might be in a treatment program getting buprenorphine or Suboxone. They come into the jail, they were removed from it, they would go through withdrawal and then go out on the street and potentially overdose after release. Now it's a great partnership with the sheriff's office. The jail is keeping people on their medication-assisted treatment and making sure they get a warm handoff back to their treatment provider after they get out of jail. One of the great things is about working with the sheriff's office is we got a real, their perspective on this is that the inmates are part of the community. You know, they come in with health problems, they go out with health problems. They're making sure that, especially in this horrible disease, that folks who come in on medication-assisted treatment are maintained on that, and they don't fall off a treatment. So it's a great partnership.
We've learned in our partnership with Public Health and Alan, and I said it earlier in an interview, we're part of public health. We don't want to hinder, or we don't want people to go out there and die. But the first step is we've taken the first step, and that's strictly keeping people on their treatment when they come in. Eventually, our goal is to identify, assess, and our doctor be able to start the treatment in the jail and then do the warm handoff to the providers in the community. That's the goal. And then we can really start to attack some of these issues that Alan's been talking about.
Yeah, one of the things we're really working at is getting more medication-assisted treatment out into the community, getting more access. So one of the partnerships we have is the Public Health Department has a partnership with Lifeline Connections. And they actually have somebody who's stationed out at the Harm Reduction Center at Syringe Exchange, and they basically try to recruit folks who are opioid users into medication-assisted treatment. So get them off, you know, the heroin and get them onto medication-assisted treatment. People who are on medication-assisted treatment can function normally, hold jobs, their reaction times are normal, and the longer you can keep people on medication-assisted treatment, the better their prognosis is. So, and you can, along with medication-assisted treatment, you can provide the other counseling and therapy sessions for folks to treat their substance use disorder. So we're really working together to get more access to medication-assisted treatment in the community.
And Rick, just one thing. So you're talking about moving to this program. Can you do it within the existing jail structure, or is that part of the?
It's a real challenge right now. So my detox area is half the size of this room.
And this is a small room.
And this is a very small room.
Chroma key studio.
Yes. Our Medical 1 unit is up a floor and over. Our Medical 2 unit is across the hallway on the other side. It's a real challenge. And we've been overcoming the building with people and staff. This will be a real challenge. It's a small program right now. We've only had 2 so far, 2 or 3. We want to get there, but overcoming that building is really something that the community has to look at and make a decision on what they want to do. We were built in the 70s when people were detoxed in that small room, and today it's a whole different environment and a whole different view of how we are smarter on crime. We're still tough on it. I mean, if people want to victimize our community, we'll get you to bed. That's not a problem. Yeah. But if you want to break the cycle, we'll get you the tools also. Okay. And part of that, getting those tools, is having the right size toolbox that has the right containers.
Right, and we've talked about
We've talked about it in the past.
We are out of time, but I do want to make sure if people want more information about opioid use in the community, where can they check?
Well, they can check. I don't have a phone number to give you right now, unfortunately.
Sure. So Clark County Public Health.
Clark County Public Health on our website.
397-8000, and we'll put up the website.
So we have 2 different approaches to this.
Okay.
If you first of all, let's talk about people who are dealing drugs illegally.
Okay.
And we'll be sending you the phone number, but the drug tip line is 360-397-6017. And then we also have on the Clark County Sheriff's website a place you can give tips. The second is if you've got a family member coming to jail and they're on MAT, have them bring their paperwork, have them bring their records, have them call our medical unit. Our 24-hour number is our duty sergeant, 360-397-2141. And we will make sure everything's ready to go so they have a seamless entrance and a seamless exit. But we really do need that documentation, because some people, believe it or not, aren't always honest with us, and they try to get stuff in. So we have to have all those things in line and ready to go.
Website, you can find treatment providers as well, because there's a number of treatment providers in Clark County. www.clark.wa.gov/alcohol-drug is, and then you already gave the phone number, but yeah, and the website will have links to treatment providers and information about that as well.
Well, thank you very much for meeting with us on this.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks.